Hi Internet, this is Mira Reads. Welcome to our new series, The Fae of Ice and Fire, where we will explore the connections between real-world folklore and some unexplained mysteries in George R.R. Martin's novels. First on the list are the Barrows. Prior to the Starks becoming kings of winter, the North was primarily ruled by the Barrow Kings, so named for the characteristic mounds on their land. While they are only mentioned a few times, the Barrows appear to be central to at least some of the families of the North. The Barrows are first described in Game of Thrones when Ned and Robert are riding south to King's Landing. The rising sun sent fingers of light through the pale white mists of dawn. A wide plain spread out beneath them, bare and brown, its flatness here and there relieved by long, low hummocks. Ned pointed them out to his king, the Barrows of the first men. Robert frowned.
Have we ridden on to a graveyard?
But what are barrows? For a modern audience, the most familiar example might be from Lord of the Rings. The Barrow Downs were an area of hills that served as a final resting place for the Dunedain, until dark spirits called Barrow-wights came to inhabit them. Some claim that Tolkien based these fictional Barrow Downs on the 9 Barrow Downs on the Isle of Purbeck. These are Bronze Age burial mounds said to be the resting place of 9 kings after a great battle. We know that Martin is a fan of Tolkien, based on numerous interviews, but while Martin may be giving a nod to Tolkien's Barrow, the Boyne Valley tombs in Ireland contain 3 passage graves that Martin likely drew inspiration from. The New Grange is one of these 3, a large mound with a cruciform chamber and an inner stone passageway. Interestingly, it has an opening above the doorway, cut so it aligns with the rising sun on the day of the winter solstice. It contains human bones and appears to have been a place of religious significance, with many carved stones and what appear to be offerings. Okay, Mira, you said the Fae of Ice and Fire, and so far you've only talked about burial mounds. What gives? What's likely most important for our purposes, these passage tombs were considered to be passages to the other world in Irish folklore, and possibly the homes of the Tuatha De Danann. They are sometimes described as deities, similar to those of the Greek pantheon. Over time, they became synonymous with the Aos Sidhe, or the Fae. The folklore indicates that they had some control over the weather and the land, that they could change shape, and perhaps most importantly, they were said to live underground, especially in times of peril. She literally translates to mound, so the Aos Sidhe are the people of the mounds. We can clearly see the parallels to the children of the forest here, most obviously with the shape changing and living underground, but also with myths like the Hammer of the Waters and the breaking of the Arm of Dorne. There are many examples of underground dwellings, passages, mounds, and barrows in Song of Ice and Fire, nearly all of them connected to the children or the weirwoods. Bloodraven's Cave springs to mind first, with the corpses of the old greenseers connected to the roots of the trees. But there is also Beric Dondarrion's hideout, where he sits upon his weirwood throne. There are the caverns, where Gendel's children disappeared, Molestown and the Wormways at the wall. There is the well at the Night Fort that leads to the Black Gate. Highheart. But there are 2 cavernous structures closely tied to the trees that I want to highlight: the House of the Undying and the Crypts at Winterfell. As I mentioned in my last video, the House of the Undying is set apart from the rest of Qarth in a grove of black trees with blue leaves that the warlocks used to make shade of the evening. Long and low, without towers or windows, it coiled like a stone serpent through a grove of black-barked trees. No other building stood near. Black tiles covered the palace roof, many fallen or broken. The mortar between the stones was dry and crumbling. At first, I had trouble imagining this building until it struck me that the, quote, Palace of Dust is yet another passage grave or burial mound. As shown here, there are burial mounds with tile and stone on the outside, much like what is described in the book. If the House of the Undying is an Ifiquevron barrow, this would tie together the parallel between the Undying ones and Bloodraven. As the Ironborn say, what is dead may never die. This description fits the Undying to a T if they're literally living in a passage grave. The only potential hiccup is Dany's experience on the inside. Pyat Pri instructs her to always go up and to the right, and she walks seemingly endless hallways and climbs countless staircases. But I believe this can be reconciled in two ways. First, Dany just slammed a glass of hallucinogenic tree juice, so her spatial awareness and internal clock are going to be unreliable for the rest of the chapter. Second, this is a place of magic. It is unlikely that Dany could get lost inside the New Grange for hours in the real world, but Hadrian's Wall is 10 to 15 feet tall in the real world, not 700. Martin isn't afraid to take real-world historical sites and make them larger than life. I believe that the bizarre fluctuations in the space can be explained by Shade of the Evening, Martin's reimagination of the burial mounds, or some combination of the two. Which brings me to the Motherlode theory. We've established that burial mounds in Song of Ice and Fire have great cultural and magical significance that are likely tied to Martin's version of the Aos Sidhe, the children, the others, and potentially other Fae analogues. We've established that these burial mounds are especially significant in the north, that the kings of winter fought the Barrow kings for control of the north. But this begs the question, did the kings of winter have their own barrows? I believe the answer is yes. It is mentioned numerous times that the ground under Winterfell is not level. In the first book, Bran notes, "The builders had not even leveled the earth. There were hills and valleys behind the walls of Winterfell. There was a covered bridge that went from the 4th floor of the bell tower across to the 2nd floor of the rookery." Bran also observes, "In the older parts of the castle, the halls slanted up and down, so that you couldn't even be sure what floor you were on. The place had grown over the centuries like some monstrous stone tree," Maester Luwin had told him once, "and its branches were gnarled and thick and twisted, its roots sunk deep into the earth." The World Book highlights the fact that Winterfell seems to have been built in pieces over time, and many people hypothesize that the crypts were the original structure and that the Stark's ancestors may have lived underground like the children or the people of Molestown. This is certainly possible, but it doesn't answer the question of how and why the Starks would dig down to a certain point, stop, and then take their dead all the way to the bottom. Many theorists have speculated that this may have been a mistake on Martin's part, or perhaps there is some sort of magical explanation for why the older Stark dead need to be buried further below. My explanation is much simpler. The oldest kings of winter were buried just below ground level, rather than digging further down. The Starks made artificial mounds, adding layers of their dead over top of the older generations. Because, keep in mind, all of the Starks were buried in the Winterfell crypts. It's just the kings and lords that get statues. So we're talking about an absolutely massive amount of space, much like the Wall and the House of the Undying. This may sound completely out of left field, but keep in mind that Barrowton, the keep of House Dustin, is literally built on top of a barrow. There is local precedent for this type of architectural decision. The World Book estimates that construction of Winterfell as we know it began about 2,000 years ago. Supposedly, the Starks have ruled the North for 8,000 years. It is entirely possible, with the passage of all that time, the stories of the Stark barrows were lost, and the family just accepts that there are areas of the crypts that they just can't access. In any case, the theory that Winterfell rests atop ancient burial mounds of the Kings of Winter answers multiple questions for us. It explains why the builders didn't first level the earth before constructing the castle. It explains why the older Starks are buried at the lowest levels of the crypts. And finally, the association between the Aos Sidhe in our world and the Children of the Forest begins to offer some insight into the upcoming theory, the nature of the pact between the First Men and the Fae of Ice and Fire. If you don't want to miss it, hit like and subscribe. Until next time.